Hello, this is Still Guns, recorded on a potato. No, I'm not. It's actually my computer's built-in webcam. So, a couple of months ago I uploaded a World of Warships playstyle discussion video that was 23 minutes long. And as a result, many people got bored within 30 seconds. Audience retention, of course, started at 100% for the very first second, and slowly went down. I think only one other person, save for me, in the entire world has watched its full length, and he was from Bangladesh, I think. So, where does this leave us? Well, I have decided that it's best to shorten the existing video. You would not believe how much time I've saved simply by cutting out small gaps. At least a minute's worth, which makes a big difference. It's still quite long, it's still about 15 minutes, but hey, if you want to skip to a quick summary, annotation up in the corner. So, I give you a much shorter playstyle discussion. Take it away, chaps. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, this is Still Guns, and today we're going to be talking about how I believe War Thunder navies and World of Warships will play. Now, we know quite a bit about World of Warships. We know that there's going to be destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, and of course battleships, but submarines will not be in the game. So let's talk about World of Warships first. I think we're sinking. World of Warships. We'll start with the sort of the light tanks of the game, sort of the starter vessels, I should think. Destroyers. From what little I know of the game, they're going to be sort of a combination of light tanks and medium tanks, such as this American Summers class will be sort of the medium tanks of the game. Very fast, but not a lot of armor. Their uses will be limited. The guns aren't very good against anything heavier than a destroyer. I mean, this Summers has 5-inch guns. I mean, it's got 8 5-inch guns, but my pocket battleship, for example, has 11-inch guns. It's sinking, sadly. I mean, look, these are 11-inch guns. They're meant to be 11-inch guns. A pocket battleship would rip a destroyer to pieces. Whereas something like this battle cruiser, fast battleship thing, yeah, it's gonna just utterly ruin destroyers. One advantage that the destroyers do have is that most of them have dual-purpose armament. So these 5-inch guns can not only fire at other warships, but fire at aircraft as well, often with devastating results. And they have one great big advantage over the other ship types of most nations. Torpedo launchers. Going to be absolutely deadly in the right hands, and they will probably be the preferred way of playing. I mean, the Chieftain prefers playing in destroyers. As I say, they're going to be pretty much the medium tanks of the game. Pretty much already found what World of Warships' dominant ship type is going to be. I mean, everyone's going to want battleships, but these things, once they find a following, you're going to see them everywhere, of course. Then we have the next ship type, cruisers. Now, unfortunately, the Fiji class, the Crown Colony class even, here is sinking, but it's not too far gone that we can't use it. These are going to be the sort of interim. In the case of light cruisers, they'll have lots and lots of 6-inch guns. In this case, there's 12 of them. The American Brooklyn has 15, and the Japanese Megami, when that was a light cruiser even, had 15 6.1-inch guns. So, fairly similar, but pretty deadly still. Light cruisers, I should think, will stop appearing around about the mid-tiers, tier 5, and you won't get very many light cruisers anymore. And then you'll start getting the heavy cruisers, of which the Deutschland class over there is technically one of them. The Deutschland class pocket battleship was technically a heavy cruiser, but heavy cruisers usually have 8-inch guns. So I've got a feeling that the cruisers will not be very popular. I mean, several famous ship types are heavy cruisers, but you have, well, cruisers of most types, but they're not particularly special. In real life, they were made to head up destroyer divisions and all that. Their guns, whilst they could easily eliminate lower vessels and aircraft carriers, heavy cruiser, light cruiser, they just don't seem worth it unless you have a Japanese one. Now, we're going to pretend that this is a Japanese Kuma-class cruiser, which it looks fairly similar-ish, almost. But, yeah, the Kuma wasn't the best light cruiser around, but when we get to something... In fact, you know what? Give me a second. And suddenly we find ourselves in the game's museum. And whilst this is no heavy cruiser, there is a heavy cruiser available. Only one. This is a Takao class cruiser. And Japanese... I think the Japanese nation is going to be a very popular nation for one singular reason. Very many of its ships are torpedo armed. Now, unfortunately, I do not have many of the cruisers or any of the destroyers installed at the moment, but this will have to suffice. If you can just about see in those louvers there, whatever you call them, you can see the torpedo launchers with torpedoes in the tubes. It doesn't matter what kind of ship you're on, torpedoes are going to be Japan's speciality. That's the word I was looking for. Now, most the Japanese destroyers will have a ton, except for the Akizuki class, which only has a single quad launcher. The light cruisers will be alright, I suppose. The aforementioned Kuma is one of the worst, but give it sort of Kitakami upgrade, which ought to be in the game. It will give it something like 10 torpedo launchers, which will make the Kuma a very dangerous little vessel. And then you have the heavy cruisers. They all have the same number launchers. I should assume they're 24-inch long lance launchers, so hopefully these things will be pretty deadly. Only disadvantage is that Japanese vessels, save for the famed Yamato, well, they are lacking in armor. Most of them are pretty old. And even the ones that aren't old, such as the Takao, which was launched in the early 30s, their armor is still quite lacking. So, what about the great big battleships? I think an Iowa will suffice here. Well, of course, the battleships are going to be the big guns, but we have to remember here that in many cases, the main guns would take something like 30 seconds to reload, at the very least. Very, very slow rate of fire, so you'd be relying on these dual-purpose 5-inch guns here, most of the time. Upsides on, they have lots and lots of armor, of course, but they're slow. Well, they're sitting ducks, practically. Even against an enemy aircraft, they may have this absolute butt-ton of anti-aircraft guns. I mean, look at all these men in orange life jackets. This thing is filled with Bofors and Oerlikons, which are 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. This thing is prepared. Anything that the Japanese could have thrown at it, even the Germans, if needed be. And even then, you weren't guaranteed protection. So yes, battleships, whilst they are going to be the sort of the heavy tanks of the game, they are going to be slugging it out with each other. They need to be wary of the one other ship type I have yet to mention. The aircraft carrier. The community is going to hate these. They're going to be practically the artillery. They will launch planes, dozens of planes, remembering that these ships could hold sometimes up to 100 aircraft. Now, not all of them are bombers. There will be fighters. And this is actually a very interesting ship type to talk about in World of Warships terms. I mean, you can't just send in hundreds and hundreds of... Well, I say hundred. You can't just send in dozens of torpedo bombers and hope something gets through. they're gonna actually you have to send up fighter cover. You can't just rely on your ship's anti-aircraft armaments. Those aren't foolproof. You need air support. And a fighter aircraft, such as those Buffaloes on the deck, like they're right next to the bridge island, they're going to be very, very useful in being sort of the prime defense for your big battleships and of course your other aircraft carriers. The aircraft carriers practically won the war for the Allies. Of course there will be no carrier battles, but I wouldn't be surprised if the best ship on either team is an aircraft carrier. You rely on an aircraft carrier. If you lose your carrier early in the battle for some reason, an enemy destroyer kit gets through and pumps half a dozen torpedoes into it, and it doesn't have say sufficient repair crews, you're gonna be at a severe disadvantage, even if that carrier is something like a little Casablanca escort carrier. One aircraft carrier, even a small one, could make the difference in a team. It doesn't matter what type of aircraft it's using. If you have a carrier and the enemy does not, you have an advantage, and you have to exploit that. You can't just have some bloke in a carrier run to the ground and I'm artillery now, I'm a bunker. You have to be skilled to use these. I can tell already, this is going to be a ship class that requires skill. You need to have ship management. I know what it's like from Battle Stations Midway. You couldn't just send up a ton of Avengers from your one and only carrier, because sure, the enemy could send up 2 squadrons of Kates, which are Japanese torpedo bombers, but then they might also send up a Zero squadron and take out your Avengers, and then you've got to launch some fighters to take out those Zeros, but then it's too late. Those Kates have got there but whilst you're preparing those fighters. It's going to be so crucial to get the mix of aircraft right. You have to know when to send up the right planes. These things are going to decide the battle, not the battleships. Of course, if there's a battle where there are no carriers, then of course, sure, fine, well, the battleships are what you'll need to look after. But if there does so happen to be even just a small carrier, it's going to make the difference. You need to look after it. It needs to be driven by a good player. They won't be for everybody. It's just like artillery. I think I've got my point across. You have to be skilled. You have to get the skill right. So I think we'll sort of end it off here for World of Warships. Just do a recap. Cruisers, not going to be very popular in my opinion. But you never know, you might find that there's tons of them. Here's a thought: auxiliary cruisers, merchant cruisers, probably only going to be premiums, but you never know. Destroyers, sort of the medium tanks of the game. Get in fast, load up, dump some torpedoes into a target, and then fend off the enemy whilst you're spending 2 or 3 minutes reloading. Gonna require some skill to play, but they're gonna be pretty much battle vessels. With any luck, these should be easy to play. And then finally, save for the carriers, could have gone on about those a ton, we have the great big battleships. Which will probably also be split into battle cruisers, such as HMS Hood and the Congo class here. Battleships, semi-important. Gonna dish out the firepower, they can take the hits, but there's one big problem: they are slow. So yeah, these will be the easiest to play. now we come to War Thunder. And I think I'm going to make a different video for that. So I've talked about World of Warships in this one. Stay tuned for War Thunder.